Hey now, and welcome to DrupalEasy Podcast, episode number 237. My name is Mike Anello, and in this episode, I have an interview with Donata Stroink-Skillrud, one of the founders of Termageddon.com. That's a service that helps you keep your site's privacy policy, terms of service, and other site policies up to date, and I might add, all for a very reasonable price. In my opinion, this is an episode that everyone who owns, maintains, or builds a Drupal site should hear. Before I get to that, I want to mention Drupal Career Online. So 2021 is the 10th year of Drupal Career Online, and next semester begins on March 1st. Drupal Career Online, or as we call it, the DCO, is the longest-running long-form Drupal training program in existence. Twice a week for 12 weeks, we focused on best practices for building and maintaining Drupal 8 and 9 sites. We cover things like Composer, developer workflow, information architecture, views, as well as module and theme development, and more. So if you're interested, or if you know someone who's interested, or if you know someone who needs it, check it out at DrupalEasy.com/DCO. If you or someone you know applies, you can use the coupon code 10years when applying, and you'll get 5% off the cost of the course. That's DrupalEasy.com/DCO. So I've been wanting to do a privacy policy focused podcast episode for a long time, but it took until now for me to find a qualified guest. Donata more than met my criteria, so let's get to it. I'm here with Donata Stroink-Skillrud. Hi, Donata. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. So let me introduce you to everyone. This is Donata. Donata, this is everyone. Donata is the president of Termageddon, which we're going to talk about what Termageddon is in a few minutes. But you're also a licensed attorney, a certified information privacy professional, as well as the vice chair of the American Bar Association e-Privacy Committee. So there's a lot there, so let's break that down a little bit. So I wanted to have you on because I just went through the process of updating our privacy policy. And I kind of, the last time we did our privacy policy, I think was 3 years ago. And I did what I suspect most folks do, and that is just copy and paste stuff that you find around the web that says, oh, that seems like that applies to us, and kind of make this Frankenstein privacy policy. And I've kind of known that having a static privacy policy or not reviewing it every so often, whatever that time period is probably not the best thing. So it being around the holidays, my client load has kind of slowed down a little bit. So I said, okay, well, this is a good time for me to dive into it. And I was out there on Twitter and LinkedIn and just doing some searches and stuff. And I found Termageddon, which is a service. And I think maybe we'll talk, I know we're going to talk about that more in a minute, but it's a service that provides privacy policies as well as keeps them up to date. So
Yep.
That's kind of the point of this conversation. But let's go back and learn a little bit more about who we're talking to. So Donata, what does it mean to be a certified information and privacy professional?
Sure. So the certified information privacy professionals are certified by the International Association of Privacy Professionals. If you ever want to learn about privacy, I encourage everyone to go to IAPP.org. And it is the largest privacy organization in the world. I'm actually the chair of the Chicago chapter here. And the IAPP has created a certification mechanism. So essentially what you do is you study about privacy laws and what they mean and how they apply, and what somebody needs to do to comply with those privacy laws. And then you take a test. And once you take a test, you get, well, if you pass, I guess, you get certified as a certified information privacy professional. And, we also have to keep our certifications up. So every single year, I have to do a certain amount of studying and a certain amount of educational events in privacy to keep my certification up. But it basically, the point of it is to show others that you're an expert in privacy.
So is this something that's only available to attorneys, or is this anybody?
It's anyone that's interested. So if you go to IAPP.org, you'll see certifications. And then you can click on that and learn more about the various certifications that are offered. And they're offered to anyone who's interested in privacy. You don't have to be an attorney, you don't have to work in privacy. But if you are interested in it, it's definitely something that I recommend.
And it sounds like a lot of it is probably geared around online activity, but not all of it. I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's correct. So it really depends on what certification you get. You can also get a certification in a technology. So if you're working in IT, you might want to consider that certification. Or if you're managing like a privacy team, there's a different certification that you can choose as well. And there's different certifications based on what areas you're interested in or what privacy laws you're interested in. So it's really a lot of different choices and flexibility, but the one that I have is mostly focused on online privacy. Yes.
So let's go ahead and compare and contrast that. This will be like a college essay question with the American Bar Association e-privacy committee that you're vice chair of.
Yeah. So the American Bar Association, for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically a very, very large group of attorneys in the United States that are interested in keeping up to date with developments in law in their area that they're focusing on. So the e-privacy committee helps other attorneys keep up to date with privacy developments. We have different events that we plan that help attorneys understand different developments or keep up to date with different developments. So it's also a group that's mostly for attorneys that are interested in privacy. So I guess the biggest difference probably is the IAPP. You don't have to be an attorney to join, versus the ABA is mostly for attorneys.
All right, very good. So in reading about Termageddon a little bit, I learned that you and your husband founded the company, you being an attorney and him having run a digital agency for a number of years. So this
Yeah.
very much seemed like a chocolate in my peanut butter type thing, where it was a good match for a site like this. Is that pretty much the genesis?
Yeah, exactly. So before Termageddon, I was actually writing privacy policies for my clients. So I was doing them one at a time. And I noticed that I was asking my clients very similar questions about their privacy practices. So, for example, like what personal information do you collect? What do you do with that information? Who you share it with? And then I noticed that I had like 5 or 6 templates that, as you said, I would Frankenstein together and end up with a final privacy policy. And I noticed that that process was very cumbersome. And to be honest with you, very boring. It was very repetitive. So I wanted to figure out a way to automate it. And for him, he had his own web design agency, which he successfully sold to come over to Termageddon full time. And he noticed that his clients would always ask him, like 2 days before launch, hey, I think I might need a privacy policy. Where do I get one? And, he would either have to copy and paste some template for his clients or he would refer them to a privacy policy generator, but he wasn't really getting anything in return. And he's like, you know what? That's not fair. I'm giving all this business to someone and they don't even really care that I exist. So that's how we came up with Termageddon.
So did it start off with just privacy policies? Because I know now. So this is what I ended up using. I think I mentioned that. And I know that there's other policies that you can generate using Termageddon. Actually, just the other day, I did our terms of service as well. But when it first started, was it just privacy policies?
We always started with the privacy policies, terms of service, disclaimer, and end user license agreement. So we've had all four since the very beginning. But what's really interesting is that when we initially started the business, we thought that only US based companies would be interested in working with us, which was a really big mistake. So we actually started getting people reaching out to us from like Canada and the UK saying, hey, like, can we use your service? So that was one thing that we learned was that, we should not have thought of this as a product that only US companies were going to use. So pretty recently, we launched compatibility in Canada and the UK, which has gotten a great response. So it's really interesting as a US based lawyer to try to figure out like the terms laws in other countries. It's definitely been a very interesting experience from that point of view.
Right. And Termageddon, this is not a brand new thing. You have been around with Termageddon since, I think, 2017. Is that what I read?
Yeah, so that's when we initially started. Obviously, it took a long time to get all of the policies engineered initially, and to get the system built up. And what's really interesting too is that with privacy law changes, we're constantly re-engineering things. So we're always adding new stuff and new features. So it definitely has not felt like 3 years. It's gone by a lot quicker than that.
Yeah, and that's, you just touched on a point that I mentioned earlier. And I think a lot of folks who either have their own sites or who build sites. So, I'm from the Drupal community. So a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast are building sites for their clients. And I know in the back of my mind for a long time, I've always thought, man, that, that privacy policy on that client site, I know is 5 years old. And I know that it's probably wildly out of date. But up until I started doing my homework a few weeks ago about how to, is there a service that can provide me with up to date, or like how do I wrap my arms around this? That was kind of one of those things I've kind of worried about for a long time. Is am I going to get burned one day because I'm not keeping these things up to date? So I've got a few kind of big questions around all this stuff that can hopefully answer, help some other folks out as well. So let's start with, something very basic. You mentioned a couple minutes ago that Termageddon does privacy policies, terms of service, disclaimers, and end user license agreements. So do all sites always need all four of those? Or like, what are the, in general, broad stroke conditions under which a site might need one and not the other?
Sure. So I know it's definitely can be a confusing topic for a lot of people. It seems like a lot of documents, like, do I need all of this? Do I not need all of this? So when it comes to privacy policy, any website that collects what we call personally identifiable information, or PII, needs to have a privacy policy. Now, PII is any information that could identify someone. So, for example, name, email, IP address, phone number. So, as a developer, the main thing that you should know is if a website has a contact form or if a website has analytics, it's collecting PII and it needs to have a privacy policy. So when you're building a site and you're building that contact form, that's when the light bulb should go off in your head. And it's not necessarily sharing or selling or even using the PII that's collected, it's just collecting it. When it comes to a terms of service is a document that basically lays out the rules of using a particular website, and it helps limit liability. So, a great kind of thing to look out for on websites is third-party links. So, if a website that you're building includes links to Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or any other third-party website, that's when you want a terms of service. Because if somebody goes from your website to a third-party website and gets a virus or is scammed or something like that happens, they can come back to you, and you could potentially face some liability there. So you want to make sure.
That's pretty much every website, though.
Exactly. Yeah. So pretty much any website, you want them to have a terms of service because you want to limit your liability. Another great example is e-commerce. You want to answer consumer questions about refunds and cancellations and shipping. Those things are done in the terms of service. If you're potentially worried about copyright infringements, terms of service can help protect you there. So that's a great point at which you should look out and have a terms of service. A disclaimer, the best way that I can explain a disclaimer is like, if you've seen those exercise videos from the 90s, and you know how at the beginning they'll have the please stop exercising if you feel faint or if you don't feel well.
Right.
That's a disclaimer. So you usually need a disclaimer if you are participating in affiliate programs, if you are providing exercise or health tips, if you're providing any information that could be seen as legal advice. Those are the main areas in which you would need a disclaimer. And then lastly, an end user license agreement or an EULA, you need that if you're selling software, like packaged software. So for example, if I were to go to a store and purchase Microsoft Office, I would get an end user license agreement. And that's what that is.
Well, how about if you're like a music artist and you're selling downloads of your music directly? Would that require a EULA as well?
No. So that's different. That's a ULA works for software. So if you're selling packaged software, that's when you need it.
I was just making the argument that like an MP3 file, or not the argument, the question is an MP3 file a piece of software in the eyes of the law? And it sounds like you're saying it isn't.
Not really, no.
Okay. So let's go back to privacy policy really quick.
Sure.
So it sounds like if you have just a completely static site, meaning there's like no forms, not even a contact form, if you add Google Analytics, for example, to your site, that would trigger the need for a privacy policy.
Exactly, yes. So Google Analytics will collect an IP address, which is considered PII. So at that point, you need to have a privacy policy. And then in addition, Google's terms of service, when you actually install Google Analytics, you have to agree to their terms of service. And their terms of service specifically requires you to have a privacy policy.
All right. So another question. This is something I thought it was kind of, I figured it was true, but you actually confirmed it in one of our email exchanges a week or so ago. You mentioned a contact form. If you have a contact form that collects information, I was never 100% sure. Does that mean if that information is being stored like in a database on the web server, or what happens if that information is just, you put it into a form, hit a button, and it just sends an email and nothing else? And I believe you explained it to me that it doesn't matter where that data is stored.
That's correct.
If they're giving you data, you need a privacy policy.
Exactly. So it doesn't really matter where it's stored. It doesn't matter if you use it. It doesn't matter how you use it. Like you could never look at it again and you would still need to have a privacy policy. And the reason for that is because privacy laws are relatively unique. Privacy laws protect consumers and not businesses. And privacy laws are written in such a way that they have an extremely broad application. So, a great example is the California Online Privacy and Protection Act, which applies to any website that collects the PII of California consumers. Now, if you think about your website and if you think about the contact form that you're building, anyone from anywhere could submit their information on your contact form, meaning that California consumers could be submitting their information, meaning that CalOPA will apply to virtually any website, which I think a lot of people miss. So, in the US, California has a couple privacy laws, Delaware has a privacy law, Nevada has a privacy law. So a lot of people will think, okay, well, I'm not located in those states, so I don't need to worry about that. But that's actually not the case. What matters is whose PII you're collecting, where you do business, and where your customers reside. So, for example, I'm here in Illinois. Let's say I have a customer who's from Nevada. That's sufficient connections to that state, meaning that I have to comply with Nevada's privacy law, even though I'm not located there. And let's say I've never stepped foot in Nevada, that doesn't matter.
So you mentioned something, which I don't even have it written down, that I was going to ask you, but it triggered something in my mind. And I think that I read, sometime in the past couple of weeks while I was doing all this, that the California privacy law does that only kick in for certain sites or businesses of certain size, or wasn't there some criteria for that, or am I off base on that?
Yeah, you're correct, actually. And it's so nice to talk to somebody who like did their research. And I'm sorry that you had to do that because it can be frustrating for a lot of people. So California actually has two privacy laws. One is the one that I previously mentioned, CALOPA. That one does not care about the size of your business or where you're located. The second one is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is a law that was passed recently. And it was actually recently amended by the California Privacy Rights Act. And I think just that combination of the three illustrates how complicated this can get, and that you really want an expert who's taking a look at this. But the CCPA, the second privacy law, does usually apply to larger businesses only. So if you have like a certain revenue threshold, or if you sell 50%, or if you receive 50% or more of your annual revenue from selling the PII of California consumers, or if you collect the PII of 50,000 or more California consumers per year. So, generally speaking, the CCPA will apply to larger businesses only. However, one big portion of the CCPA is vendor management. So, if you're a developer and you're doing business with a large company, like let's say you're building a website for a large company and you have access to their databases, just through the nature of managing their site, and you have access to that PII, your customer might actually require you to comply with the CCPA. Because if you have access to their PII and you're not compliant, that means they're not compliant. So it's important to check your contracts. If you're doing business with larger companies, especially ones that are based in California, you should definitely check your contracts to make sure that they're not requiring you to comply with the CCPA, just because you're building them a website.
Okay, see, my next question was going to be, why are privacy policies so difficult to write and maintain? But I'm pretty sure you just answered that. And I'll give you a great example just from my process over the past couple of weeks. Is I had no idea until a couple of weeks ago that Nevada had privacy laws.
Yep, exactly.
And I don't know when that happened, but I it's not in my circle of like daily news where I would even like that would ever be on my radar.
Right. So if I can illustrate an example for you,
Of course.
right now there's 23 proposed privacy bills in the United States. Those are bills that I track on a daily basis through three different software programs that send me alerts. Now, as more privacy laws are passed, privacy policies will change. So right now we have a certain number of privacy laws out there. There's a lot of stuff happening in California. So, for example, when a new privacy law is passed, the state attorney general will come out with regulations. California's regulations have now been updated a total of four times in the last year. And every time the regulations update, your privacy policy updates, right? So, unless you have alerts set up for the California Attorney General's like privacy section, you won't know about this. And that's something that makes it really, really difficult for small businesses to have an up to date privacy policy, because you have all of these changes to existing laws and you have all of these states proposing their own privacy laws. And that's not even to discuss like other countries. So, for example, Canada has a privacy law. And right now, they're considering changing that law to allow consumers to sue businesses directly for privacy law violations. So, and it's not just businesses that are based in Canada. So, it's really something that you have to keep track of, because you have to update your privacy policy each time. But it's really hard for small businesses to do that because it's very time consuming. It's difficult because you have to read laws and interpret them and understand the cases and what the wording means and keep track of the regulations. And that's what makes privacy so difficult for small business owners. And that's why we started Termageddon, is to help make that process less painful.
Yeah, sounds like a great business opportunity for someone who can get through all of that legalese and still be awake. Because
Yeah,
I am not that person.
we're very lucky that I love my job.
Yes, very lucky. All right. So I guess the question is then, how often should a privacy policy be updated? And that's a wide open question. Obviously, it probably there's a lot of it depends, but maybe we can just say, like, what's the minimum amount of time that an organization should like set their stopwatch for, that saying, hey, we haven't updated our privacy policy in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Like, what's is there any advice there?
Sure. So, if you asked me this question like 5 or 10 years ago, I would probably say never.
Oh no, is it down to 3 days every 3 days?
It's not. So, if we look at how privacy worked 5 years ago, consumers didn't really pay much attention to it. Regulators didn't really pay that much attention to it. No one paid that much attention to it. I mean, you copied and pasted some template, and that was it. Um, because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, that all changed. So in 2018, that happened, and consumers became very upset about their PII being scraped and shared and all of that. So they pressured their legislators to create new privacy laws. I can tell you that in the last year, we've updated our clients' policies, I believe, 5 times. So you had Nevada's privacy law was amended, so we had to make an update for that. California Consumer Privacy Act and the regulation updates, Brexit, which was a big update as well. So in reality, 5 years ago, the number would have been zero. Now the number is probably 5 or 6 times over the year, sometimes less, sometimes more. I would say at a very minimum, not if I don't touch on the regulatory updates and the law updates, at a very minimum, you should be updating your privacy policy every time you're collecting new PII. So if you amend your form and now you're collecting phone numbers and you never collected them before. If you want to use PII for new purposes, so for example, if now you want to send an email newsletter, you should update your policy. If any of your privacy practices has changed, and then also I think at a minimum, you should definitely review it at least once a year to make sure that it's accurate.
Okay, and that's kind of what Termageddon does, right? So this is a service that folks pay for, and for I believe plans start at $99 a year. And correct me if I'm wrong on that.
$10 a month or 99 a year, yes.
Yes, okay, and that's for one site, privacy
Mm-hmm.
policy for one site, and that basically, I went through the process with Termageddon, and I don't know how many questions there were, but there were a bunch of questions about what kind of data we collect, what we're going to use it for, where we do business, and questions like that. And then the policy was generated, and it's kind of slick because it's generated automatically, and then I was provided with basically a little bit of iframe code that I put on our on DrupalEasy.com/privacy, and poof, there's our brand new privacy policy. So I'm assuming that if there's some tweaks to language that you make in the next month or so, there's really nothing I have to do. Well, in some cases, there would be nothing that I have to do. I'm just, automatically I would get the new text coming through the iframe. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so one license basically protects one website. So it has a privacy policy, terms of service, disclaimer, and end user license agreement, and you can use the ones that you need. We don't charge extra based on the laws that you need to comply with. And essentially, when a new law is passed, we update your policy through that code. So most of the time it is automatic. We can just add some language or take some language away from our end. But if a new law passes that requires some obscure disclosure that we couldn't answer for you, we might send you a question in an email. So for example, let's say a new law passes that asks you to disclose whether you sell information. We just send you an email asking you, hey, do you sell information? You click yes or no, and then your policy is updated accordingly.
All right, so let's wrap this up. And this was the trickiest part for me personally. There were some things that we were doing. We're starting an online ad campaign in the next few weeks here, and there were some privacy implications there, and it wasn't as far as I could tell, there was nothing like in the questionnaire that directly corresponded to what we were doing. So it was kind of up to me to, figure out, well, how do I write this and include it as part of our privacy policy? And, on Termageddon, you can override sections of the privacy policy if you want with your own language. I ended up just adding kind of like an addendum to the end, but that part's almost not important. What I wanted to talk about, and we exchange emails about this, so I'm pretty sure what I'm about to say is correct, but please, correct me or add on as you see fit. For the stuff that I had to add, which I think a lot of folks are probably gonna, everyone's got weird edge cases here and there, I think. What it all comes down to in a privacy policy, or a lot of it, let's say, is what's being collected, why is it being collected, where is that data going? Like, where is it going? Is it staying with your company, or is it being shared with other companies or other organizations? How can I opt out? And I guess opt out is almost, how can I opt out from you even collecting data on me? Or how can I opt out, say, forget about me? For GDPR, which I can't believe we're 29 minutes in, and this is the first time I think either of us have said GDPR. One of the things about GDPR is you have to, the consumer has to give consent before you can even start collecting data.
Yeah.
So that's, I kind of figured out all of those questions, and I wrote kind of our addendum based on those questions. Do I have all that? Like, as far as broad strokes, are there any big questions that I'm not answering as part of that?
Sure. So the questions that you just said are based on your business and exactly what you do. So the way the questionnaire works is the first set of questions help us determine what privacy laws apply to you. And then based on what privacy laws apply to you, the remainder of the questions change. So for example, if you need to comply with GDPR, and nothing else, your privacy policy will look one way. If you need to comply with GDPR, CCPA, and let's say CalOPA, your privacy policy looks completely different. So it's all based on what privacy laws apply to you. And that's why the questionnaires need to be dynamic. And that's why at the beginning we figure out what privacy laws apply to you. Because if you don't do it based on what privacy laws apply to you, you can end up with something that's completely different. So I think, if you look at it from a general perspective, it's what information you collect, what do you do with it, who you share it with. But, certain privacy laws have very specific disclosures. Like, for example, what's a toll-free number that a consumer can contact you at to ask you to stop selling their PII. So it can get very specific based on what privacy laws apply to you as well.
Well, I think that's about all I can think of to ask you at this time. I mean, I know that you answered a lot of my questions online over the past couple of weeks, so I want to say thank you for that. And I would just encourage, folks, I can't imagine that there's anybody who listens to this podcast who isn't thinking that, I think I fall into the category of, I may need to look at my privacy policy, or I might have a client that needs to look at theirs. So I encourage everyone to go and check out termageddon.com. So it's Termageddon. And Donata, I want to thank you very much for your time here over the holidays. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm always happy to talk about privacy and help answer any questions that our customers have or that any of you have.
Yeah, you saw me in a conversation on Twitter about it, and you chimed in, which was very nice, and I appreciate it. And that always helps when you do have a couple of competitors out there that I saw, and being able to find someone who's willing to engage in a one-on-one conversation online is very helpful. So I really did appreciate that.
Good, thank you.
Okay, you are very welcome, and thank you very much. And let's move on to the next segment. Thank you for listening to the DrupalEasy podcast. Now, before you run off and start updating your privacy policy, which I know you're about to do, if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast. And you can find us on any of the major podcast services, or If you use YouTube regularly, you can subscribe via youtube.com/DrupalEasy. We also provide a transcript of this episode at DrupalEasy.com. Finally, if you have suggestions for future guests or topics, please let us know on Twitter at DrupalEasy or via the DrupalEasy.com contact form. Thanks for listening. See ya!